On the broadcast tonight, with the Korean government's latest tax revision proposal stirring up much controversy in the country, President Park Geun-hye orders a complete rewrite of the tax code from scratch. The tax code debate will have the latest. Record high temperatures continue to grip the nation for weeks now, keeping Korea's energy officials on high alert. Power authorities are urging the public to join in efforts to prevent a possible blackout. And even as it identified 26 Palestinian prisoners to be set free as a goodwill gesture to revive peace talks, Israel infuriates Palestine by issuing approvals for more than 1,000 new units of housing on land it seized in 1967. This is Early Edition at 6. It is 4 a.m. in Panama City, noon in Tel Aviv, and 6 on a Monday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Geon-hye.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for tuning in. New tax proposals are at the center of a hot political debate here in Korea.
Very late last week, the Korean government announced a new tax plan proposal which sparked backlash among the general public as well as politicians.
On Monday, President Park Geun-hye moved to quell the discontent as opposition lawmakers took to the streets. Our Kim Hyun-ji reports on the latest at the National Assembly.
The main opposition Democratic Party has called the government's proposal a tax bomb on the middle class and launched a fresh public protest outside the National Assembly. The government's proposal was forecast to rake in more taxes from the top 28% of all salaried workers, who earn about $31,000 annually or more. On Monday, the DP set up a special committee to protest the tax plan and kicked off a campaign in the streets to collect signatures from citizens who opposed the proposal. Responding to the mounting criticism, President Park Geun-hye on Monday ordered her officials to rewrite the tax code from scratch. The ruling Saenuri Party welcomed the president's decision and urged the Democratic Party to end its street protests and come back to the National Assembly.
A signature-seeking campaign is something that only civic groups do, not lawmakers. The Democratic Party should come back to the National Assembly.
However, the Democratic Party says it will continue its two-track strategy, working both inside and outside of the National Assembly.
The Democratic Party has never given up working at the National Assembly. It's our two-track policy. We are meeting with ordinary people outside the National Assembly while actively engaged in negotiations with the ruling party.
On Monday afternoon, the DP lawmakers taking part in the street protests came back to the National Assembly to cast votes over whether to extend a special probe into the National Intelligence Agency, which stands accused of meddling in last year's presidential election. A full-member assembly approved a plan to extend the probe by 8 days to August 23rd. The investigation into the spy agency's scandal, along with the tax code revision issue, will be the focus of legislative activities for the remainder of August. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Moving on to a power alert in this country. As the nation suffers from record high temperatures this summer, Korea is again on high alert for impending power shortages as a thermal power plant generator was shut down on Sunday due to turbine problems. The government expects Korea's electricity consumption to reach its annual peak for the first 3 days of this week. Here's Arirang News' Ji Myung-gil with this report.
In the face of a looming energy crisis, Korea's energy minister said Sunday the government is doing all it can to secure sufficient power reserves.
Even minor problems at any of the country's power plants this week could lead to serious consequences such as nationwide blackouts that we experienced back in 2011. The government is doing all it can to secure additional power reserves.
During the first 3 days of this week, the government has strongly urged all office buildings, homes and factories to save electricity during 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The country's electricity demand is expected to reach its annual peak, topping 80 million kilowatts, which would cause the country's power reserve to dip below 2 million kilowatts. The government has banned all government agencies from turning on air conditioners through Wednesday. To add to concerns about this unprecedented demand, a 500,000 kilowatt generator at a thermal power plant in Tangjin, located in South Chungcheong province, was shut down on Sunday.
The generator turbines were vibrating too much that we had to abruptly shut it down. We are trying to find out what caused the problem.
Repairs are underway, but officials say it will take at least 1 week before operations can resume. Another thermal power plant generator in Seocheon, South Chungcheong province, was temporarily suspended Monday morning due to problems with the pumping system, but operations resumed an hour later. 심영길, Arirang News.
More on power crisis in other parts of our world. North Asian countries have been having a hard time keeping their nuclear power plant online and running safely in recent years. This is fueling concern about the high dependence these resource-poor countries have on nuclear energy. Yoo reports.
To countries like Japan, Taiwan, and Korea that lack natural resources, nuclear power has long been an essential source of energy. But safety concerns are causing many to reconsider the continued use of nuclear power. Just last week, the Taiwanese government announced one of the country's nuclear power plants may have been leaking radioactive water for the past 3 years. The leak was identified at the first nuclear power plant located at Shimen, not too far from the densely populated capital, Taipei. The use of nuclear power on an island like Taiwan has long been controversial, as a major leakage could contaminate the entire area. Activists use the example of the Fukushima nuclear accident when they call for a complete ban on nuclear energy in the country. The Japanese government also announced last week that 300 tons of radioactive water is pouring out of the Fukushima plant every day. It also admitted the plant operator's TEPCO is still struggling to handle the situation some 2.5 years after the accident. Here in Korea, 6 of the country's nuclear reactors are sitting idle, 3 for maintenance work, and the other 3 after they were found to contain parts with fake safety certificates. More plants could be subject to a shutdown as the investigation continues to see if additional test certificates have been faked. With so many of its nuclear power plants out of action and the scorching summer weather yet to reach its peak, the nation is bracing itself for a possible blackout. As one of the cheapest sources of energy, it's no wonder North Asian countries have become highly dependent on nuclear energy. A third of Korea's electricity comes from nuclear power, a third as well for Japan before the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, and nearly 20% for Taiwan. Yoo, Arirang News.
Shifting our focus to North Korea, officials in Panama say they have found more explosives on the North Korean ship that they seized about a month ago. This comes as inspectors there conclude the search of the ship that was impounded in Panama for carrying undeclared arms from Cuba. Panama's security minister said authorities found equipment for launching missiles in the last container on the ship that was opened.
Authorities removed and opened 25 containers in total that were hidden beneath sacks of sugar. The Cheongcheon-gang was traveling from Cuba to North Korea when it was seized on July 15th at the Panama Canal. Under UN sanctions, Pyongyang is banned from buying or selling arms. In the coming days, UN officials are expected in Panama to determine if the cargo did violate those sanctions.
North Korea has, for the first time in 39 years, amended the founding principles of its Workers' Party.
The principles, which stand as the law of the land in the North, have apparently been rewritten to legitimize the succession of hereditary power to leader Kim Jong-un. Our Han Da-eun has more.
Kim Jong-un, in his latest attempt to carry on the legacy of his family's rule, has amended the 10 founding principles of the nation's Workers' Party. The founding principles, experts say, have been a critical tool used by the Kim family over the last 6 decades to legitimize their dictatorship. They were last amended in 1974 when former leader Kim Jong-il was named as Kim Il-sung's successor. The most notable amendment this time, according to South Korea's Chosunilbo newspaper, can be found in clause number 1. It went from, "We must honor the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung with all our loyalty," to, "We must honor the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung and General Kim Jong-il with all our loyalty." By adding Kim Jong-un's father Kim Jong-il and putting him on par with state founder Kim Il-sung, the principal, by default, now idolizes the current young leader. In Item 1, Article 3, the word dictatorship of the proletariat has been removed, while the Juche revolution was added. The Juche idea, which translates into spirit of self-reliance, has long been a term used by the North Korean government to justify its policy decisions while isolating its people from the rest of the world. Kim Jong-un also didn't forget a check and balance for the state's top military and party officials. He added a new clause in Item 6 that reads, "All actions that go against the principles conducted under the authority of individual party officials must be strictly banned." Pundits say the clause partially reflects the instability of Kim Jong-un's leadership. North Korea and the principles also included language that states the country has built a strong military based on its nuclear power. It's the first time nuclear-related items have been included. 한다은, 아리랑 뉴스.
The two Koreas will return to the negotiating table on Wednesday in the North Korean border town of Kaesong as the two try to reopen their jointly run factory zone in the north.
Many say the 7th round of talks are crucial in determining the future of the industrial complex. To tell us more, we are joined by our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee in the News Center.
Sung-hee, could you explain to us why this upcoming meeting is viewed as being so important?
Well, Ganyang, of course, all rounds of negotiations are important because you never know what to expect, but the 7th round of talks has an added element of significance because of its timing. It comes weeks after the two Koreas walked away from their last meeting after failing to narrow their differences. Now, both sides expressed disappointment and blamed each other for putting the dialogue on the verge of collapse. Also, the meeting is being held just days before South Korea and the United States begin their annual Ulji Freedom Guardian joint military drills. Now, experts say once they kick off, any momentum gained in the Kaesong talks may be broken. Joint military drills between Seoul and Washington earlier this year were one of the events that prompted Pyongyang to unilaterally shut down the Kaesong industrial complex in the first place.
Well, Sung-hee, 6 meetings and little or no results to speak of. What are some of the key details they need to iron out in the upcoming meeting, Sung-hee?
Well, Daniel, in its proposal for a 7th round of talks, the North made some noteworthy offers, namely that it would allow North Korean workers to return to work at the complex and that it would ensure the safety of South Koreans at the border town. But the South wants a guarantee that the North will never push ahead with such unilateral closures again, while also assuming responsibility for the current prolonged shutdown. Now, these are the key issues that will be discussed on Wednesday. But the North doesn't appear to have changed its stance. In its most recent proposal for talks, the North said that both Koreas will work together to prevent future shutdowns.
North Korea and South Korea must prevent future closures of the Kaesong industrial complex and ensure that operations will not be affected by political situations.
Well, as you see, North Korea had previously made a similar offer in its proposals, but the South had dismissed it as being unsincere.
So Sung-hee, the joint business park, of course, has remained closed for more than 4 months now. For those of our viewers who haven't been following related news too closely, would you give us a recap of how this standoff began and developed in the past 4 months?
Of course, operations at the Kaesong industrial complex came to a halt after North Korea withdrew all of its workers in early April. Around a month after that, the last remaining group of South Koreans returned from the border town, which led to a temporary closure of the factory zone. Now, last month, the two Koreas began holding working-level talks in an attempt to normalize business conditions there. At their first meeting, they agreed in principle to reopen the business park, but like I said earlier, they were unable to reach an agreement on specific conditions for doing so. The two sides did not schedule additional meetings after walking away from their sixth round of talks in late July until the North made a surprise proposal last Wednesday. Now, this unexpected move by Pyongyang came after Seoul issued an ultimatum to the North, either to hold one more round of talks or to face grave consequences, hinting at a possible closure of the complex.
Well, all indications suggest that North Korea doesn't want to see the complex closed down for good. So, Song-hye, what's behind its determination to save the business park?
Well, the Kaesong Industrial Complex serves as an economic bridge between the two Koreas as they try to overcome more than 60 years of mistrust. Now, if the business park faces complete closure, the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean cooperation will be gone. More than 53,000 North Korean workers are employed by 123 South Korean companies at the factory zone. The business park has prospered since it opened in 2004, with its total output snowballing from $15 million to around $1.5 billion in less than 10 years. For North Korea, it is also a source of hard currency as the South pays around $80 million in workers' wages per year, which is probably another reason for the cash-strapped nation to save the complex from closing down.
All right, so going into the seventh round of talks, what's the general consensus? I mean, Sang-in, what are we expecting at the negotiating table come Wednesday?
Well, Pyongyang has yet to protest the joint military exercise between Seoul and Washington scheduled for next week. Last year, the North ramped up its rhetoric 2 weeks before the Ulchi Freedom Guardian drills began, calling it an exercise for war. And in March, Pyongyang threatened to scrap the inter-Korean armistice agreement ahead of a joint military drill between the South and the United States. This time around, the North has been quiet, and experts say that's because Pyongyang may not want to risk doing anything that could jeopardize the Kaesong talks. Such views come in line with comments made by North Korea's point man for cross-border affairs, Kim Yang-gun, during a recent meeting with a Korean-American businessman. Kim apparently said that success at the joint business park would likely lead to further inter-Korean cooperation.
Kim made it clear that if the Kaesong Industrial Complex does well, so will other plans to develop the DMZ.
So the general consensus is that the North will maintain a conciliatory tone in hopes of a swift normalization of the joint factory zone, but will react aggressively should the two Koreas fail to reach favorable agreement on Wednesday.
All right, Sang-hye, we surely hope to see some significant progress being made at the talks in 2 days, and I'm sure you'll keep us updated with only the latest.
Thank you, Sang-hye, for that. That was our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee with a preview of the 7th round of inter-Korean talks over the shuttered Kaesong Industrial Complex.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by. With just a matter of days left until peace talks resume, Israel has approved a plan to build more Jewish settlement homes in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. The decision has incensed the Palestinians who are questioning Israel's sincerity leading up to the peace negotiations. Our Oh Jin-ju reports.
Israel approved the construction of nearly 1,200 new homes for Jewish settlers on Sunday, just 3 days ahead of the resumption of peace talks with Palestine. The Israeli government plans to build about 800 new settlement units in East Jerusalem and 400 in the West Bank. There are concerns Israel's move could derail the upcoming talks, with Palestinian officials criticizing the approval and urging Israel to make decisions that contribute to the peace process.
Who does these things are determined to undermine the peace negotiations, are determined to force people like us to leave the negotiating table.
However, Israel strongly denied such claims, saying the settlement expansion has nothing to do with its commitment to the peace talks.
The policy is always on the table. We said at the Bayit Yehudi party that we will not stand against the peace talks. I have the responsibility as the Minister of Housing to find our young couples houses all over Jerusalem and also in Karnei Shemron, Ariel, etc.
Meanwhile, the Israeli government has published a list of the first group of 26 long-term Palestinian prisoners it will free on Tuesday. Israel has promised to release a total of 104 prisoners, a condition agreed upon for the peace negotiations to move ahead. 14 of them will be transferred to the Gaza Strip and 12 to the West Bank. However, Israel made it clear that should any one of them engage in hostile activity against Israel, they will have to return to finish their sentence. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Another one of the few surviving Korean victims of the Japanese military's wartime sexual slavery has passed away. The House of Sharing Shelter for Sex Slave Victims confirmed the death of 87-year-old Lee Yong-yeol on Sunday.
The thought of being forced to sacrifice her youth made it hard for her to fall asleep. She said it felt like bugs were crawling over her body. She was tormented.
Lee left the country at the age of 16 and was forced to provide sexual service to Japanese soldiers in Myanmar during World War II. Since 1995, she was one of the leading activists in protesting against Japan's wartime atrocities, demanding a sincere apology from the Japanese government. With her passing, there now remain just 57 registered Korean sex slave victims awaiting that apology.
It's been 35 years since China and Japan signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, but bilateral relations are far from friendly these days. The 35th anniversary of that peace treaty is passing by quietly as there are no official events marking the milestone. A forum with experts from both countries was scheduled to take place in Beijing to commemorate that agreement, but it was postponed at China's request. That fits the trend in recent months. There hasn't been any high-level political contact between the Beijing and Tokyo for almost a year now. A territorial dispute over the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands is at the center of the strained ties, along with a host of unresolved historical issues. The growth of Japan's gross domestic product came in at a lower than expected level in the second quarter. The Japanese government announced Monday that the GDP figure for April to June period expanded at an annualized rate of 2.6%, well shy of expectations of 3.6% and far short of the first quarter figure of 4.1%. The Japanese economy did show some signs of recovery, though. Government spending increased 0.8% and the country's exports rose 3%. Looks like we have only 3 types of weather conditions here in Korea: humid, hot, and hotter. So now let's get a check on the weather with our Hannah Kim. Hannah, it was really hot over the weekend and it's pretty bad today as well.
I know, Daniel, but today is Malbok, which is the last hot day of the summer based on the lunar calendar. On this day, Koreans usually enjoy samgyetang, which is a traditional chicken soup with ginseng.
Well, Hannah, you know, the lunar calendar may indicate that it is the last hot day, but, you know, our summer is far from over here.
That's right. I really do think the summer will extend into September, and this heat wave will continue to bake our country for the next few weeks. In fact, tomorrow we expect more sunshine with clear blue skies, so while it may be perfect beach weather, you really need to protect yourselves from UV radiation. Strong exposure may lead to long-term skin damages. If we take a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, a high pressure from the North Pacific will give us mostly sunny conditions. Seoul will start off the morning at 26 and reach 33 in the daytime. Meanwhile, cities in the south will soar close to the 40s as Daegu and Gwangju peak at 37 and 36 degrees respectively. Down on Jeju Island, you'll have clear sunny skies and our daytime highs will hit 33. Daejeon will peak to 35 while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out in the lower 30s. Well, that's Korea for you. I'm Hannah Kim and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Hannah. And that's all from us for this hour. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Chen.
And I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening. And I will be away from the news desk tomorrow, but our Han Da-eun will be sitting in for me tomorrow. Good night.